When I traveled to India about 20 years ago, I took the bus or the coach to travel from one city to another. It was a night bus, so I slept through most of the ride. It was dark, and the road was surrounded by a forest. The road was only illuminated by the headlights of the bus, and we were seemingly alone on the road. I woke up for a brief moment and just stared out the window. There, I saw this creature on the side of the road, hurrying into the dark woods. The moment only lasted a second or two, but I saw this creature so clearly. It looked like something with a human body, doing an inverted crab walk. It had the head of a Doberman pinscher, or a jackal, and it had a kind of waddling gait, with each limb moving independently. Everybody around me was asleep, and I felt like a crazy person. I just kept telling myself that I must have seen something else, and misinterpreted it in my mind. I just caught a glimpse of it, and years later, I questioned whether I was dreaming it. I feel extremely certain of what I saw, but I'm probably wrong. In fact, there's actually probably a logical explanation. Again, what I saw looked very jackal-like in the head. I'm a very rational person, and I do not believe in supernatural things, but being in an Indian forest at night will make even the most sane person doubt his mind. Those forests are truly scary. When I was younger, I used to routinely sneak out of the house at night to meet up with friends and perform acts of minor mischief and light vandalism. One of the newer additions to the group lived a little out of the way, but we were always game to pick him up because it meant crossing through the tall grasses of a farm that stood between his and our corner of suburbia. One crisp, cool autumn evening, we had concluded our business of hopping a pool fence and rearranging the poolside furniture, which was scandalous, and most of the other teens had gone home for the evening. So, I decided to walk my buddy home. We cut through the tall grasses in the farm and took a seat in the middle of them by a tree that had a series of small boulders that was made ideal for sitting. We talked the usual teenage angsty crap. Who liked who? What were you going to do when you grew up? Who is going to move out first to escape their oppressive suburban life first? There was a lull in conversation, and I remember hearing a dog barking in the distance by the nearby farmhouse. I glanced up, and looming over the tall grass were three person-shaped forms. Not together, not moving, spread several hundred feet apart in the field, stock still. To clarify, this was a field of grass, no scarecrows, no trees save the one, and nothing that could realistically make these shapes. I froze up and looked over to my friend, shakily asking if he could see it. I didn't clarify because he gave a terrified nod. None of the figures moved an inch. Indistinct and shadowy, they remained exactly rooted to the spot, and we were absolutely petrified. Then, closer than close, the insisting, low growling of a dog no less than 10 feet away from us, somewhere in the grass, right on top of us. We both got up and bolted, but nothing chased after. Not the dog, not the figures, and we have no idea what made that growling. As I stood huddled with my friend, hiding behind a car on a suburban street, the moon tucked behind a cloud formation that cast a small pale thread of light down only on us, I believed in things more, like the supernatural, the unexplained. I stayed at my friend's house for as long as it took for us to think of a reasonable explanation to what we'd seen. I had to get home, and the only real way back was through that field. Plus, we had to prove it to ourselves. Prove to ourselves that it had been trees we'd failed to notice, or scarecrows that had been put up for autumn. Anything at all. We came back to the field, armed with aluminum baseball bats for self-defense, and shakily stepped back into the area with the one tree and the standing stones and surveilled the field. Nothing. The horizon was completely constant. Tall grass, no shadows, no shapes, no trees, no scarecrows, and certainly no dog. Nothing to explain what we'd seen, and nothing to stop me from bolting across the property, terrified out of my mind. No one believes what we saw and what we say we saw, or think we're blowing it out of proportion. That grass was around head high, around 6 feet, and the stationary figures we saw had easily 2 feet over the grass. I didn't sleep well that night, and while I've mostly put it out of my mind, I won't forget it. The farm was sold off and turned into a development not long after I moved away, and some nights I can't help but think that I hope they did not build near the standing stones. I know it reads like a fake story, but I lived it, and only the friend that I lived it with believes me to this day. This was back in my college days. At the time, I was a mess. I had gotten kicked out of the dorm I was living in at the time because I was just a drunken jerk, and so I lost those privileges pretty quickly. So, my only resort was to stay with a buddy who lived about 15 miles away from my college campus. Yeah, it wasn't the most ideal situation, but I was very humble, fortunate, and safe that he let me stay in his spare bedroom, rent-free for the time being, mind you. Yeah, we're still good friends to this day, and he's really been there for me. But this happened to me during my stay there. It only happened once, but it was enough to scare the crap out of me. One night, I want to say it was early in the springtime, because I only stayed there for about 4 months before I moved out again. So again, it was early spring, and I was just settling into bed, so probably about 1 in the morning. I was a night owl, don't judge me. As I feel myself drifting off to sleep, I get this overwhelming sensation that somebody's in the room staring at me. You know how when you're in that half state of sleep and being awake? That's kind of how I was. I felt myself drifting off to sleep, but I still felt aware of the things going on around me. The feeling grew in intensity over the course of a matter of seconds. I sat up quickly, scanned the room, only to find nothing. But then I heard a tapping sound at the window, which I turned my attention and saw what initially somebody trying to prank me in a werewolf mask and costume. I smirked at first, but then I studied the face of this thing, and within seconds, my smirk turned into a frown, and that's when I felt my stomach knot up. What I was looking at wasn't a person in a costume, nor was it a mask. This wasn't some clever prop either. This was a real creature. I don't think it was a werewolf, I guess, but it certainly looked like a wolf. At least it resembled that. The tapping sound I had heard that initially turned my attention towards the window was it putting its large hand on the glass. I say hand because it had 5 fingers, long black claws that were attached to each fingertip, and it gave me the most intense stare. It was a deep stare, deep into my eyes, almost like it was looking into my soul. I felt that this thing, whatever it was definitely not a person. I don't normally believe in supernatural things, but the energy this thing gave off, it felt entirely demonic. I don't know if this was a demon or what, but after staring intently at me through the window for about 10 seconds, although in the moment it felt like 10 whole minutes, it just backed away from the window, turned, and walked off. Afterwards, I was so terrified, I jumped up out of bed, ran out my door, only to be greeted by strange looks from my friend, who was sitting in the living room, smoking hookah. He kind of looked puzzled, as why I looked so freaked out and panicked, and in my boxers, running out of my bedroom. He asked, "Is everything okay?" And I told him what I saw and what was outside the window. He told me I should probably go back to sleep, and that I was just in a dreamlike state. But I swear that this really happened. I promise that what I saw was not just a work of the mind. This was a living being, or I assume so. It was flesh and blood, That much I can guarantee. I saw it with my own eyes. There's no mistaking that. It was as real life can get. I figured he wouldn't believe me, so I went back into my bedroom and just stayed up the rest of the night, hoping this thing wouldn't return. That was the only time in my entire life that I've ever dealt with anything of the paranormal supernatural realm. And even today, I'm still kind of a skeptic, but I do know that there's bad and good out there. And whatever this thing was, it was definitely in the realm of evil.